The day has finally come. As you know, I'm sure by the thumbnail and title, today I will be reading A Court of Thorns and Roses for the very first time, commonly, affectionately referred to as ACOTAR. I think this is such a long time coming because I feel like everyone else has read it by now. And I actually own this. Like, I bought this in maybe November and it just keeps getting pushed back because I'll also be getting library books who, jump their turn in line because they have due dates. And today I am starting the series. I have seen lots of people really love this series, and I've also seen people say that the books beyond the first book are better than the first book. Regardless, I'm very excited about it, and I know next to nothing about it at this point. I do know that it's fantasy romance. It's been a while since I've gotten into a new fantasy world, so I am excited for that part of it. But I also think it'll be a little bit of an experience probably with like the world building they do and everything, just because I'm not used to that at this point. And the other thing I know is that I've heard that it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I can't decide, I still at this point can't decide if I should read the summary or not, because I'm not kidding when I say I know nothing else about this. Like, anytime someone's talked about it in a video, whether it's been like a wrap up or a recommendation, I skip past it because I was like, I might as well keep the palette cleansed to begin. Maybe just go in not knowing anything from what I know before we go into it, which I guess this will be fun to look back and see, what was right, what was wrong. From what I know, like I said, Beauty and the Beast retelling. There's a character named Nesta. I know that. I'm pretty sure there's fairies in this, like the Fae, which I've never read a book with Fae, but I hear about them a lot on BookTube. I think because I'm not used to fantasy, I will read the back so I have a little bit of context going in. So, from #1 New York Times bestselling author comes a seductive, breathtaking book that blends romance, adventure, and fairy lore into an unforgettable read. Something I don't know is about the spelling of fairy, like how they spell it F-A-E-R-I-E, and obviously fairies growing up were always F-A-I-R-Y. Is that something? Maybe it's because they're folk tales? I don't know. That's always been something I've been curious about though. When 19-year-old huntress, how do I say this? This is the issue of me not watching people's reviews.
Feyre and Rhysand. Feyre and Rhysand.
Feyre. When 19-year-old huntress Feyre kills a wolf in the woods, a terrifying creature arrives to demand retribution. Dragged to a treacherous magical land she knows about only from legends, Feyre discovers that her captor is not truly a beast, but one of the lethal, immortal fairies who once ruled her world. At least he's not a beast all the time. As she adapts into her new home, her feelings for the fairy, Tamlin, this is going to be embarrassing for me, transforms from icy hostility into a fiery passion that burns through every lie she's been told about the beautiful, dangerous world of the Fae. But something is not right in the fairylands. An ancient, wicked shadow is growing, and Feyre must find a way to stop it or doom Tamlin and his world forever. I hope that through this vlog you are able to relive reading this book for the first time again, because I know that once a book becomes special to people, it is fun to, relive that experience. Wish that you could read it for the first time again. There definitely will be spoilers throughout this vlog, so if you are like how I am now and know nothing and kind of want to stay that way, then just come back after you read the book, because I do plan on talking about, everything that happens. I'm very excited to get going, but I also am very nervous that it will be a letdown. I honestly feel like no matter how I feel about the first book, I'm gonna read the whole series though. That's my plan. I guess it'll just depend how fast I read the rest of the series based on how much I like this book. It's time! The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the perimeters of the thicket for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of the tree branch had turned useless. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had pulled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here, there were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. They hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, then travel north past the wolf's territory and perhaps into the fairylands of Prythian, where no mortals would dare go, not unless they had a death wish. A shudder skittered down my spine at the thought, and I shoved it away, focusing on my surroundings, on the task ahead. That was all I could do, all I'd been able to do for years, focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now, with the snow, I'd be lucky to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at the movement, I unstrung my bow before easing off the tree. All right, I finished the first 3 chapters, so like very barely in, but I feel like the, I don't know, introduction, like getting to know kind of people has gone on. So we open in a scene in which Feyre is out hunting, and it talks about how like it's snowy, she's so hungry, it's been so long since she's like come back from a hunt like actually with something, and she has this moment where she sees a doe, and as she's aiming to like send her arrow to it, she sees a wolf. And in her thoughts we kind of get like a little bit, it's like kind of explaining the relations of like the world that she's living in, but she's kind of worried like, oh no, is this wolf Fae or is it just like a regular wolf? Because it kind of like alludes to the fact like it would be really bad if this wolf were actually Fae, and that like she should be running right now if it were. And there's like this moment where the wolf goes for the doe, and then Feyre shoots, and she ends up killing both of them. And it turns out the wolf is just a wolf. So she's like carrying the deer back home with her. And when we get home, we meet her family, and she has 2 sisters, Elaine and Nesta, which Nesta is the character name that I heard, because I think one of the future books is like her book, and I've heard people be like, I didn't like Nesta, so I didn't want to read a whole book about her, but I think they start to like her more in her book, and I don't even know which of the series is that. But Feyre is the youngest, and it becomes like really obvious real quick that she's the only one that is doing anything, that both of her sisters like aren't willing to really contribute, aren't really willing to get their hands dirty, even though their situation is like requiring it. It's like they used to have money, but they don't anymore, and like they're going hungry, but they're not contributing, they're not helping, and so it all kind of just falls down on Feyre. And their dad has a bad leg, and I think it's like he kind of like tries to help when he can, but he also just really isn't doing much, so it's all on Feyre even though she's the youngest. So far I found just like frustrating to read, just the fact that she's like so surrounded, like it almost feels like claustrophobic, that like she's like in this family that like she can't just like abandon her family and not do anything for them, but it's also like if she doesn't do anything, then like they're not gonna eat because no one else is like stepping up to the plate. So we kind of like get to know their interactions a little bit. And then the next day they're going to the market because now Feyre has both the wolf pelt and the deer pelt that she's like wanting to sell so that they can have like a little bit of money come in. And during this scene in the market, we kind of start to get like more of like the rundown, at least a little bit I think, of like how the world kind of works, which I feel like is still confusing to me, but I'm sure I'll get used to it. But it sounds like there are the high fae who used to enslave, who I'm assuming are humans. Like I'm assuming Feyre is a human, just like a regular mortal, but they used to be slaves to the high fae, and the high fae are like brutal and vicious and cruel, and I think there maybe was like a war, and then there was a treaty that was made, and so now it's like the fae have the northern part and then the like mortals can have the southern part, and there's kind of like a soft border in between them, because I guess it's assumed like if the fae were to come to the south, or like if any of their monsters, their beasts were to come to the south, it's just to like brutalize the mortals basically. There are a group of people, which I forget what they're called now, but they're like people who, I don't know if they worship or just like believe in the high fae, and it's like as they're walking to the marketplace, they like jump out in front of the sisters and start to be like, do you want to hear the blessed word? And it really gave Sister Cindy vibes. Like it gave Sister Cindy vibes so much of like, Honomo, do you want to hear the word? And the sisters are like, no. Whenever the high fae ruled us, they were mean and evil and not great, and so why would we like believe great things in them? But Feyre talks to a mercenary while she's there and kind of picks up on the fact that maybe there's some tension brewing, it sounds like maybe the fae are getting like closer to the border, and there was this town who the other night like this big monster came and shredded the people basically. So we're kind of like picking up on some tension, which I'm sure is going to become relevant in the future. And then how the 3rd chapter just ended is that they're all like sitting around. My father was dozing in his chair, his cane laid across his gnarled knee. As good a time as any to broach the subject of Thomas Mandray with Nesta. I turned to her, opening my mouth, but there was a roar that half deafened me, and my sister screamed as Snow burst into the room and an enormous growling shape appeared in the doorway. So I haven't started the next chapter yet, obviously, but I'm assuming that whatever is about to happen is whenever Feyre learns that she has like a debt to pay for killing the wolf or something like that, because it mentioned that in the back, or maybe I've heard that, I forget. But I think maybe we're coming up on the time where she's gonna have to like leave her family and go live with the fae. So far I feel like it's reading pretty YA. I think it's been a second since I've read a book that was in first person, so that's just like taking kind of some adjustment, but that's just like based on the books that I've read recently. I don't really feel any kind of like emotion towards the characters yet, which granted I'm so early in the book, so that's fine, I don't have to, other than just like frustration at the way that like they're describing her family, and it's like, oh man, you guys don't want to mess up your nails so you can chop wood so we can be warm for the winter? Selfish. As if I've ever chopped wood in my life. I'm definitely not hooked yet, but obviously like we're so early in the book. I'll update you again once I make it a little bit further, or a lot bit further, depending on how it goes. Maybe you know what's gonna happen where I feel the need to come back and update you. I made it to page 112, so we're about 25% of the way in now, and I feel like we made a lot of progression. It's definitely giving Beauty and the Beast at this point. So I think last time I updated the camera, the vlog, we had just gotten to the point where this like, you know, mysterious beast, whatever, crashed into Feyre's home in their village. So since then, now we're at the place where Feyre learned that in order to like appease the treaty, since she took the life of a Fae, now she has to like give her life to the Fae basically, and so she has to come with Tamlin, who I'm assuming is another main character. My guess is that he's going to end up being the love interest. I don't know that for sure, but I mean, just based on like the Beauty and the Beast vibes of it, it seems like he has to become the love interest. But he is high Fae, which means that he like can rule over other Fae, I guess. I feel like since this is my first Fae fairy book, I'm kind of struggling with that part just because it's like weird to picture in my head when I haven't, you know, imagined another like species of human-esque characters. So I'm definitely getting used to that. But he and Feyre travel back to his castle, I guess, and she is kind of slowly sussing things out, figuring out, you know, can I actually trust them? What are the vibes here? What can I be up to type of deal? And the scenes that have been giving Beauty and the Beast the most, I feel like, is whenever she is eating dinner every night and it's like this big table, lots of food, and it's her at one end and it's Tamlin at the other end. And then, what's the other guy's name? Lucien. Lucien is like Tamlin's, what, sidekick kind of? Not really. It seems like they're friends, but I'm pretty sure Tamlin is above him and he's kind of a little butthole, but I think it's in an endearing way. I could see in the future, like as the series progresses, I feel like I could see Lucien doing some sort of like betrayal, backstabbing, like we don't like him anymore, but then he has like a recovery arc. I feel like that could happen. But as far as the characters goes, Tamlin, who we've been introduced to, is very like kind of quiet, stoic, brooding. He has all this like power and is ruling the lands, whatever, but he never really wanted to. He's mysterious, he's a warrior, and right before I finished, there was the scene where he went out to fight, I don't know how to say this little monster, like the Bog, something. He went out to fight whatever creature and he came back wounded, and so Feyre stitches him up, wraps him up in the middle of the night. And like that very much is a Beauty and the Beast scene. Whenever he goes out and like fights the wolves, you know, and then comes back. Very much a Beauty and the Beast scene. But the parts of the magic that I feel like I'm not quite getting a grasp on yet, but it's kind of introducing, is that there's some sort of blight that's like happened to magical creatures some years ago, and it's like some sort of magical sickness type thing going on, and it has required all of the Fae to have like masks on their face because it happened during like a masquerade ball however many years ago, and it was like the magic got messed up, so now the masks can't be removed from their faces, which is just kind of like weird, but it's mentioned that a couple of times. It's kind of like alluded to things getting worse in the Fae world, the Fae portion of things. And then there's the Bog monster that maybe not monster, like creature that I mentioned before. The fact that like that was in Tamlin's land is weird apparently, and like he was really disturbed by it or like bothered by it whenever he went out to fight it, and I guess he's like the only one who could fight it, is what I was saying, which kind of just like gives us a picture, I guess, into his, you know, high power warrior status, whatever it is. And then there's also another one, I think Puka is what it was called, something like that, that Feyre was like looking out her window at night and she saw her father and he was like beckoning to her, like, come on, come on. And so she was like, oh wow, my father like made his way all the way here, like it's time for my escape. Climbs out her window, her father's like walking backwards and like keeps beckoning to her, and I felt like it was a trick whenever like you know, you could kind of pick up on the fact. I feel like that gives Harry Potter a little bit, like I feel like something like that happens in Harry Potter, but it's like her greatest desire, luring her out so that it could eat her, kill her, whatever it is. And of course Tamlin saves her from that. So we're just kind of getting like the lay of the land at this point. I do see what people mean whenever they say like it starts off slow, because whenever I'm setting it down, I'm not having the desire to pick it back up, but I still do have the curiosity of kind of like what's going to go on. And I do think at the point I'm at now with 25%, Tamlin is becoming a bit more lovable of a character. Like, I don't know, I really am liking him so far. I hope he's the love interest. Like I said, I assume he is, but I hope he's the love interest. I'm kind of annoyed by Feyre at this time, which I get that once you're, you know, taken out of the life you've always known, even if you don't really like it that much, and planted into something where you don't know anybody, everybody's like not your kind, whatever. I get that it can be unsteadying, but I feel like since it's fiction, I just want her to like stop being rude and like trust them, because I trust them, but I guess I also don't have like history of them treating my people wrong. So I hope that she comes around soon, because I want her to be better. I feel like I'm not really enjoying her that much. I feel like I keep making comparisons to different books, but I feel like she's giving Katniss at this point in a way that whenever Katniss like wasn't lovable. Like I said, she's traumatized, so it's whatever. I'll have some grace with her, but I'm still curious to see, where it's headed, all that's going on, whatever. But I will say at this point, I'm not just like falling head over heels for it. Excited to keep reading though. Page 181. So still under halfway, and at this point I'm kind of excited that I'm still under halfway because I'm excited to see where the book is going to go. So some notable scenes that have happened since I talked to you last. A lot that I'm picking up from The Beauty and the Beast, which I understand is a retelling, so there's going to be similarities obviously, but I find that like while I'm reading I just like keep picking up on the similarities, but with a little twist. Because what was interesting, for example, whenever Feyre goes to find the creature that answers all the questions, and then she gets attacked by the Naga on the way back, and Tamlin comes to rescue her. Like, that's straight out of Beauty and the Beast. I did think it was kind of interesting, in the chunk that I read, Feyre gets introduced to the study or the library that's in his home, and she's not as excited about it as Belle was in Beauty and the Beast, because we find out that Feyre can't read comfortably and can't write comfortably. She's functionally illiterate, and that's a source of shame for her. But then what he does show her that she does get so excited for is the gallery, since she really likes to paint. So that was kind of cute. In this middle portion, there is this kind of connection that's starting to form between Tamlin and Feyre. Again, at this point, I just like don't feel convinced by it, but I think it's like the pacing of it feels weird, because he is her captor, and she's learning more about him. And she learned that he's High Fae and that he's the High Lord of the court. I guess I didn't say that yet because she learned that from that one creature, that he was like the ruler of the Spring Court. And it's kind of at that moment I feel like is the turning point where she's kind of like, oh, the High Lord is the one that spared me. And her heart starts beating, and she starts getting like little butterflies in her stomach whenever he's around, and it keeps talking about his golden skin and his golden hair. So I can see where there's like something brewing, but at this point it's not like, oh, cute little lovebirds. As far as the bigger picture, we've learned now, like I said, that Tamlin's the High Lord of the Spring Court. We've learned a little bit more about like his background. We've learned a little bit more about Lucien's background, which I think is fitting, and she'd set up well for his character. The fact that he was the youngest of the sons of the High Lord of the Autumn Court, and the kind of brutal scene that his dad and his brothers subject him to, and the fact that Tamlin kind of took him in under his court. I feel like that's really fitting to his character. I think that was good character building. We keep hearing about this mysterious she who seems kind of evil, seems like she has power. It doesn't necessarily seem like Tamlin's afraid of, but like she is working against him somehow. My guess is, I keep comparing this to other stories, but maybe that's like a sign of good literature, because it's kind of interesting, keeping me intrigued. But it reminds me of like Hades from Greek lore, like the she that they keep talking about. I feel like she's the Dark Lord of something, and she's trying to kind of, spread her darkness. I don't know if it's going to be, well, I think it is going to end up in a war. I feel like I've heard that from future books. So at this point, my guess is that like the she and Tamlin, somehow there's going to be a war that breaks out. I kind of wish, I don't know if this is going to be the case, but I want Feyre to become like a princess of some sorts. I don't know how we would go about that, but I do want that for her. I definitely have gotten more intrigued though, which I think is fitting, because people have said like the first quarter of the book is what's slow, and then you get more into it. But at this point, it's definitely not impossible to put down. It's more still the lingering curiosity of what's actually going on. Alrighty. Page 282 update. So we're hitting that 75% mark of the book, and a lot has happened since we talked last. I'm assuming, since this is a spoiler vlog, that you've probably read the book, so I don't need to go into everything as far as the plot goes. But the biggest things I feel like is that we're learning more and more, obviously, about the fairy realm and like what's happening in the politics and everything like that. And then also the romance has progressed between Feyre and Tamlin. I'm still just not loving the romance though at this point. It does seem like, for being the Beauty and the Beast retelling, I'm pretty sure that he has a similar curse that the Beast had, where he has to like make someone fall in love with him. But it hasn't explicitly told me that at this point yet, but it has now alluded to it, because we've gotten to the point now where, what's his name? Rhysand? His name is putting up a little like flag in my head that I feel like I've heard people talk about him.
Feyre and Rhysand. Feyre and Rhysand.
And is Rhysand a romance interest later in the series? Because that's like, whenever I heard the name, once he was finally identified like with the name, that I was thinking that I've heard like him being in a romance little interest with someone else, maybe further on the series. But at this point, with how his character is currently, I don't know what that's going to be and how that's going to be possible, where we're going to be rooting for him, but I also could just be totally like confusing that, mixing that up. But he comes to the castle or the home manor, whatever it is, and after he leaves, that's when Tamlin tells Feyre like she has to leave. It's not safe for her anymore, which is frustrating. It is frustrating, and it's frustrating to watch her just leave, you know, and not like fight for him or whatever. But there's the moment whenever she's leaving that he says I love you, and this is the second time that he said it to her. He says I love you, and she didn't say anything back, but it like doesn't really give a good reason. It's like it like describes it as if like, oh, I felt it, but I couldn't get the words on my lips, which I feel like is silly. But she rides in her little carriage and arrives back to her family in the human realm, and I feel like I just hate this part. Like I just hate this part of the book. But she arrives to her family and they're back in their like rich manor with servants and with like high society, and her dad and Elaine both still have like the little glamour, so they don't really know what happened to her and where she went. But Nesta, the glamour didn't work on her, so she knows this entire time. And it seems like, I don't know how long Feyre's there. It seems like maybe like a couple weeks or so, but Nesta like tells her like, I know everything that happened, like fill me in now, because like I remember this beast taking you, what's gone on since then. And it does, I feel like it's a bit redeeming for Nesta, because it's like, okay, I'm on your side, Feyre, like I went to look for you, and it makes her feel like not all bad, you know? Like I don't really hate her at this point. So Feyre fills her in, and Nesta's like, you have to go back. Like, what? Why are you here? You have to go back. And Feyre's like, you know what? You're right. Like, I do need to go back. I should never have left. I should have told him I loved him. So she and her little horse walk through the forest. They find the wall. Apparently it takes them 2 more days to find a hole in the wall that they can pass through. But all this happens like within 1 paragraph. But they find the hole in the wall, and then they make it all the way back to the home, which I feel like that's a weird journey for her, because based on the fact that she encountered like 3 evil little creatures who wanted to eat her when she was just in the woods around Tamlin's home, like how did she make it all the way from the human realm back there with like no problems? We didn't run into anybody, there was no tension, like she just shows back up. That felt weird. But she shows back up at Tamlin's house, and everything's like busted. Like it's just entirely busted, deserted, broken, dust everywhere. She sees blood some places, and she's like, oh my gosh, I think there was a fight. And so she's kind of like scouring around, and she runs into Alice, the servant. And Alice is filling her in, and this is like right where I was ending, which I did get to the point when I was reading last night that I didn't want to put it down because I was curious what was going on. But Alice fills her in and says that, I can't remember her name now. Whoever the girl is, that like, Amarantha? I feel like Amarantha's pretty, of a name. She says that Amarantha came. Amarantha is like the queen of their little continent island, but she's not supposed to be, because the 7 High Lords are supposed to be queen, but she kind of like inserted herself. And so then there's this reveal that's like, oh, there's not actually like a physical sickness going on in the fairy realm. She is the sickness. Like this evil queen type deal is the sickness. I don't think I really like that, because how are we going to frame it as like, oh, like there's a sickness, it's making people sick, and then it's really just like a bad rule. That felt weird to me, but she is the sickness. And I guess Tamlin's time was up is what I've learned. And like I said, I like finished in this scene, so I probably should have finished reading that chapter so I would actually know what's going on. But Tamlin's time is up, because it sounds like he was a little bit more defiant whenever she was like becoming a ruler, and she's put some sort of curse on him, which is what I'm assuming is going to be similar to Beauty and the Beast, where it's like, oh, you had to have someone fall in love with you. And I feel like if his time was just up and the time that Feyre was back in the human realm, then that means like had she said I love you or something as she was leaving, his curse would have been broken. They haven't told me that yet, but I'm gonna be kind of upset if like it's that close, because that's just frustrating. Like, no, I wouldn't like that if that's the case. I literally stopped to go to bed in the middle of like that scene last night, so I haven't actually learned anything yet, but I wanted to do an update so that whenever I get to a point where I'm reading and can't put it down again, I'm not updating like 150 pages at a time. Oh boy. A lot has happened, all within like 100 pages. So I definitely get what people are saying when they say like the first part is definitely slow, and then once it gets going, it gets going. Confirmation about the curse. Yes, if Feyre would have said I love you at that moment, then theoretically everything would have been broken and fixed. Which just feels, it's harder to take the rest of it seriously knowing that, I feel like. But as we know, Feyre showed back up at the house, everything was busted, right? She finds Alice. Alice takes her to the little shortcut to get to under the mountain. Feyre shows up under the mountain and is taken straight to Amarantha's little like throne room, finds that Tamlin is sitting right next to her, looking all stoic, not making eye contact. and Feyre, despite Alice's like 1 of 3 warnings to her being don't make deals with people, Feyre ends up making 2 different deals with the Fae. But deal number 1 is that if she successfully passes 3 trials, then everyone has to be released, the curse is broken, etc. Or if she answers a riddle that Amarantha gives her, then everyone will be released immediately. But Feyre's like, I love Tamlin. I will do anything for him. So she wants to do the 3 trials. Amarantha's little soldiers like beat her up a little bit, and then they go to a cell where she's just like laying uncomfortable, broken nose for a while until Lucien sneaks into her cell and heals her. And then we get to the first trial. The first trial is this big old worm. She's like thrown into his den basically, and the worm wants to eat her. And it's this big ugly creature, and then she actually ends up beating the worm by strategically like trapping him to land on this little graveyard of like spiky bones that she sets. And Lucien helps her during this trial because he's like, on your left, whenever she doesn't know where the worm goes, and it turns out he gets punished for that. And the punishment that Amarantha does is that she makes Tamlin, I think I'm switching off how I pronounce his name, sorry. He makes Tamlin do 20 lashes on his friend Lucien, because it seems like that's what like Amarantha's evil is that she likes getting to that deep down hurt of like making people or Fae hurt the people or Fae that they love. So it's not just like, oh, I'm gonna beat you. It's like, I'm gonna punish you by making you watch me beat someone you love, or by making you do it yourself. That's evil. That is definitely something else. But Rysand is becoming a bigger character now, which, remember how I said in the beginning where I was like, I thought that Rysand was a love interest of somebody. I still think that that might be the case in the future. And also, after I finished last night, I watched both Destiny Sitwell's video and Sarah Crowley's video from after they read this like months ago, and both of them were under the impression that Rysand was going to be more of a love interest as well. But he sneaks into Feyre's little dungeon cell after the first trial with the worm and heals her, but she makes a deal with him where it's like, yeah, I'll heal you, but you have to spend a week in my court with me out of every month. So literally like 25% of her life, she made this deal. And he heals her and fixes her arm and ends up with this little tattoo on her arm that has an eye and feels kind of supernatural. And she's like, dang it, now I'm like branded to be with the Night Court. That's gonna hurt Tamlin's feelings. And this whole time, Feyre and Tamlin like aren't speaking to each other. Whenever Feyre is before him and Amarantha, he like doesn't really look at her. He doesn't really acknowledge her, nothing like that. He's just sitting stoically, which I get, because I think the strategy is that if he lets Amarantha see how much he's like hurt by what's happening, that's where she gets her pleasure, enjoyment. And so he's trying not to let on to like what hurts him the most to avoid being hurt more, and thus Feyre being hurt more. But also it just makes the relationship go cold. I wasn't convinced that she liked him all that, like I wasn't convinced of their romance whenever they're actually in the manor. She didn't fight for him whenever she left, and then she comes back and now it's like, I would literally die for you, like I would die a painful death for you. And it's like, you haven't even spoken to him, you haven't even like made eye contact with him. But then we get to these scenes where Rysand is like dressing Feyre up every night, making her drink this wine that makes her basically black out the entire time and makes her like dance for him and the whole court every single night, which just feels yucky, especially if he's gonna grow to become this love interest. I just feel like he's not getting a good start. But what can go for him is that he never really like makes advances on her like that, you know, he just like makes her dance. But still, that's not, you don't get points for that. Then the second trial comes, and it's where Lucien is all chained up, and it's like a hot stake is gonna go into both him and Feyre if she pulls the wrong lever. And there's 3 levers, and there's like a little riddle written out on the wall. Oh, but remember, she can't read, so she's stressed, and she's just like, well, okay, now that the hot metal is basically about to burn me now, I'm just gonna pick 2. And so she reaches for the second one, and the tattoo on her hand, remember the kind of like supernatural weird tattoo, starts burning, and she like looks up at Rysand, and he's like, and so she's like, oh, okay, let me try 1. And she goes for 1, and her hand starts burning, and Rysand is like, and so instead of then just going and pulling 3, she goes back to 2 to try it out again. And then she goes back to 1 to try it out again. And then finally, like in the very last second, she pulls 3, and it's fine. Everything's fine. And there's one scene like right before her 3rd trial where Tamlin like kind of sneakily sneaks into this room during the like party where usually she's dancing. And they like ferociously make out for like 5 seconds before Rysand comes in and is like, what are you doing, you idiots? And he makes Tamlin leave, and then he acts as if he were in there with Feyre to kind of cover for them. But then also I think it kind of gets under Amarantha's skin because like Rysand's supposed to be like her person. So we're kind of getting snippets along the way that Rysand like is not loyal to Amarantha, but I don't know, I'm not a big believer in the whole like enemy of my enemy is my friend type deal. So like just because he doesn't like Amarantha doesn't mean he's good and doesn't mean that he's actually been helping Feyre. It's just like he is trying to be, he even says it himself, he's like trying to be pragmatic about it and like he's trying to get the end goal, and so he's going to do what he needs to do to get there. But we come to this third trial, and this, I was scared at this point because they bring out 3 Fae, 2 males and 1 female, and they bring out like these ash daggers too, and basically Feyre has to kill each of the 3, and that's her third task. So it's either she kills 3 innocent lives and then passes the task and theoretically everyone gets released, or she doesn't and she has like a clean moral compass, but then also like she failed the 3 tasks. I was so sure and also so scared that it was about to be Alice and her nephews, because it specifically said 2 males and 1 female, and so I was like, Alice and her nephews, because can you imagine? And so it's like they do the 2 males first, and it's like, you know, they take the bag off their head, she doesn't know who it is, whatever, kills him, takes the bag off the next male's head, doesn't know who it is, kills him, takes the bag off of the 3rd head, and it's Alice, like weeping because Feyre just killed her 2 nephews. Can you imagine? I was so scared it was going to be that, but it was not that. It really just was, the first 2 were people that we just didn't know, and then the last one was Tamlin. And so Feyre is sitting there and she's like, I have to kill Tamlin to free everybody. And then she's thinking, and she's like, there must be a way out of this. And she remembers that she overheard 2 times someone tell Tamlin that he has a heart of stone. And so she's like, oh, I think his heart is really made of stone, so I can stab him, but he won't die. And she ends up doing that. And then Amarantha is pissed, and it like picks up on the little loophole that Feyre was kind of worried about, that Amarantha didn't say if she passed the 3 tasks that they would be freed immediately. It just said that they would be freed eventually, basically. So she was like, so I could do it anytime, even after you're dead, Feyre. And she starts, I don't really understand what she's doing. I think she's like slamming Feyre on the ground. I don't know. She starts hurting her somehow to where it's like every bone in her body is breaking. And then we get, this is so cheesy. Let me read it to you. She's able to solve the riddle. I would never say it, never let her hear that, even if she killed me. And if it was to be my downfall, so be it. If it would be the weakness that would break me, I would embrace it with all my heart. If this was, for though each of my strikes lands a powerful blow, when I kill, I do it slow. That's what these 3 months had been, a slow, horrible death. What I felt for Tamlin was the cause of this. There was no cure, not pain, or absence, or happiness. But scorned, I became a difficult beast to defeat. She could torture me all she liked, but it would never destroy what I felt for him. It would never make Tamlin want her, never ease the sting of his rejection. The world became dark at the borders of my vision, taking the edge off the pain. But I bless all those who are brave enough to dare. For so long I had to run from it, but opening myself to him, to my sisters, that had been a test of bravery, as harrowing as any of my trials. Say it, you vile beast, Amarantha hissed. She might have lied her way out of our bargain, but she'd sworn differently with the riddle. Instantaneous freedom, regardless of her will. Blood filled my mouth, warm as it dribbled out between my lips. I gazed at Tamlin's masked face one last time. Love, Love, I breathed, the world crumbling into a blackness with no end. A pause in Amarantha's magic. The answer to the riddle, I got out choking on my own blood, is love. Tamlin's eyes went wide before something forever cracked in my spine. I can't. It's like it felt so intense whenever I was reading it for the first time, but I cannot take that seriously. Yeah, but the answer to the riddle was love, and she solved the riddle. And so then Amarantha's curse broke instantaneously and Feyre died. And so Feyre is sitting there dead, but due to her connection with Rhysand, like with the tattoo and everything, it's like for a few pages we're like watching through his eyes, but it's like kind of still Feyre kind of still being aware of what's going on, but she can like see her dead body, and she sees that Tamlin like sees her dead body, and Tamlin goes and kills Amarantha and then comes back to Feyre and is like, oh my gosh, she died. But then all of the 7 High Lords come to Feyre, and there's this little sparkle in their hand that they're like gifting to Tamlin for Feyre. Not only does Feyre come back alive, she is now High Fae. I thought we were pulling a whole, well, it's been out for a long time, but I don't want to spoil it, a whole other YA dystopian plot twist type thing, and our main character was going to be dead. But she comes back, she's High Fae. She and Tamlin make love. All is right in the world. And that was A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's so hard because I became very interested. Like, I was zooming through the pages. I needed to know what happened next. But looking back, like, I can't take it seriously. Like, it didn't hit that deep. Also, what gets me is that Feyre so much reminds me of Katniss. in all of like Katniss's character flaws and the whole like, I'll sacrifice myself and it won't mean anything to anybody else, I'm gonna do this, and you're like, chill a little bit. I do think that they are setting up Rysand to become a love interest in the future, which if that means that she doesn't end up with Tamlin, then that's a yikes. I do plan on reading the rest of the series, like I kind of knew that I would, but the next book is a chunky one, but people have said that it's the best one. However, I've been looking like at all of the bookshops nearby and it says that it's not in stock for like any of them, so I might have to order it or something. Should I do another reading vlog whenever I read the chunky one? It might be like an hour long because of how long that book is. What I decided reading wise, which I get that it's unpopular on BookTube to give like I mean, sometimes half stars, but like definitely quarter stars. However, I'm definitely a person that gives quarter stars. It's because I follow this little rating scale that has like words for each of the half stars, but I ended up giving this a 3.75 stars, and that's because to me 3.5 is good and 4 is very good, and I feel like this is between like, okay, that was a good book, but it's like a little bit higher than that, really just based on how much like I couldn't put it down towards the end. I hope you got to relive reading it for the first time again through this video. Let me know if you want one for A Court of Mist and Fury, because that's the next one. Or if there's any other books I should try out. It's been a pleasure reading with you, and I'll see you next time.